Okay, I don't know. I don't know how many people are going to turn up. Let's just do this. Let's get the show on the road. I don't know. It's
What's
like
up?
dinner time here in California.
Yeah, it's time to munch on some fun comments here from the Java nerd himself and a cloud native.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're a cloud native, and you're presently in God's country, right? Hawaii. Uh,
Is this God's country? Yeah,
it's where
I
you
guess
go when
so.
you die. If you're good, yeah, you get to go to
Yeah,
Hawaii.
if
That's
you're,
yeah. If you're good, no, it's very important. If you're
I
bad,
must be on
you
the
go to that
free
other place.
trial, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, like oh Hawaii. I love Hawaii so much. I don't like. I can't believe it's it's technically it's part of America. So like if you're American and you can get on a plane and it's not cheap, I know not everybody can do it, but if you can get to it, just do it. Trust me, there's no other state
It's
like
a
it.
bit of a
It is
swim. Yeah, I do recommend the plane.
yeah. And don't do what I saw some kid, some idiot got in the plane in the hull. Don't do that.
Oh yeah, inside of the wheel.
Yeah, or something like that. Some crazy thing where it's like it's a 5 hour flight. It's not close. It's as far from California as New York is from California. And nobody thinks about that as being like a quick day trip, you know. Uh, but yeah, worth it. Just get on a plane, sit normal like a regular person. That's important inside, and go to Hawaii and find a turtle. Don't get close to them though. You're supposed to stay without 2 meters or something. I don't know what it's like. Check the local laws, but there's a distance. Wait, where's your audio? Where's my audio? I had your audio for a second ago. Can you hear me? Can't hear you at all. Is it my audio? No, it looks like it's still AirPods.
Here, how about this one right here?
Oh, yes, I can hear. Woo-hoo.
Be
Okay.
able to hear me now.
Yeah. Good. Sorry about that.
Two. Wow, but I can barely hear you. I think it's my Bluetooth headphones like wigging out. 1 second.
You got Bluetooth headphones on?
Try talk, Josh.
Yeah. Morning. Marco Polo. Ollie oxen free.
I see. Okay, cool. This is working.
Okay.
I just
Sweet.
all right. And you can hear me still.
Potentially. Yeah. That's important.
Okay. Cool.
Otherwise, it's just talking into a microphone. Anyway, so you were saying something insightful and wise, and I didn't hear you. So start again.
Oh yeah. Did you ever get into your seat on the airplane, and they've got those funky international plugs, right? And it's like this beautiful interface of interoperability, right? Because it's got
Like
the US plug,
multitude.
it's got the Australia plug, it's got the UK square things, it's got the circles for the EU ones, it's got like a bunch of different places for you to plug things in, and you kind of don't know what orientation. So you got to go look down there, and you got your phone flashlight out, and you're like kind of looking, and you finally figure out how to stick the power brick into this universal interface.
Yeah.
And of course your MacBook charger, it weighs like 20 pounds. So it's got these two little US prongs, right?
Right.
And then it just flops out. Right? Or even worse is like you're like, oh, okay, I got smart, so I'm gonna bring my Dell laptop charger that has the ground pin in. So now it's got the two prongs and then the ground prong to like really hold it in there, and it's not going anywhere, but there's no power, right? And I'm like, how did they spend however many $1 million? Isn't even like hundreds of millions of dollars on an airplane?
Yeah.
How much does how much do you think a Boeing 777 costs, right?
Oh, fractions of a billion, look it up right now. So there's a couple problems there. First, for the first problem, get the extension cable. Right. So now you don't have the brick plugged into the port. You have the extension cable, which sits, and the brick sits comfortably on the ground. But you're right about that second problem.
It's in there, and there's still no power.
No power, and so you're drawing more power. I know this is going to sound ridiculous. There's a limiter. I think planes are only legally allowed to give you a certain amount of wattage. And
it's limited from like it depends on the model of the aircraft and also who is in the chairs next to you and if they're using power. It's like 90, 80, 70 watts sometimes, right?
something like that. Yeah.
Those
So
MacBook chargers are pretty beefy sometimes.
yeah, well, yeah, and I think there's a whole thing about like when they announced the M1s a few years ago. Are you using a Mac?
It could be anything, right? Like sometimes it's just my phone charger. Right?
Okay. Oh, your phone. No, that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. I was gonna say,
yeah.
I know this is gonna sound ridiculous, but try turning down your screen brightness, or like there's literally it's that fragile.
I've had obviously you're not going to be plugging a hairdryer into an airline outlet, right? Because they do a bunch of load shedding. That would be funny though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, like the most annoying guy ever. Excuse me. Oh, that would.
They have battery powered hairdryers. They have battery powered hairdryers. You could charge your hairdryer.
But who would be the person to whip it? Like thank God I have no hair. Like it's gone. But who? What?
They say that you shouldn't be on a phone call, right? Like you shouldn't be just like talking because that's rude.
Yeah.
So the flight attendant would come and tell you to stop. But I mean, like I've got I just got my hair cut. I want to keep it nice, right? Just kind of, you got to use your hairdryer in the window seat.
you would get mentioned on that passenger shaming Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I could make local news, if I pulled out my hairdryer.
They passenger shame the people who wear socks on the plane.
Yeah,
like it's one thing if you put your foot on the armrest of the person in front of you, like if you're just stretching out and you're putting your foot there. No, that's that's not okay in any jurisdiction. That's a problem, right? But if I think I disagree with the idea that me taking off my shoes, as long as I'm not like stinky for a brief, it's like I've done 15-hour flights. I'm going to take my shoe off.
Slippers is a good play, right? Great that's a service to everybody, right? Like just get rid of the whole shoe sweat situation, right? Yeah.
It's disgusting. Exactly. And don't sweat on the plane because, I always bring a spare pair of undergarments and whatever, just because, you don't know. Somebody's going to spill coffee on you. You don't want that. That's not good. Okay, well, we know what I'm going to do on a plane. We know what you're going to do on a plane, which is not use your computer because you have no power. But who are you?
Hi, friends. I guess if I haven't been on Josh's show in a second here, but my name's Leigh Capili. I come from the land of containers, and anybody who might be telling you that you should be using Kubernetes, I know some of those people. They're my friends, most of them. I used to work on the Flux project quite frequently, and so I helped build Flux 2.
Anymore?
No, just a reduced frequency maybe. And also I'm going to need to be looking at making this new contribution. We can talk a little bit more about this idea that I have for Flux. I've got a new feature that I want to propose, a request for change, basically.
Okay.
So that would be some pretty serious engineering commitments back to the project as well. Right now, I am going to be, I'm also working on a proposal with a couple of other smart folks on the Kubernetes project in the authorization space. So,
nice.
Anyway, I'm an engineer, I'm a developer advocate, I'm a speaker, and I like talking about nerdy stuff with smart folks like Josh over here.
Well, some other Josh. I am super glad you're here. And actually, I was going to ask you, I just had our friend and colleague Whitney on the show just a few hours ago or minutes ago or something. And we did
one of my favorite people.
She's she's one of everybody's favorite people. She's what you want when you think about like the future. I want more people that do what she not just the light board, but everything. Just the
creative,
being
organized,
and
dedicated. I've bouldered with Whitney a few times, and that's a great time. Yeah. So,
you what?
Yeah. I've spent some time in the climbing gym with Whitney as well. She boulders
so
regularly.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's so cool. We covered. I don't know. We talked about a veritable smorgasbord of like things that developers should probably know about. From the if you could like this one secret trick, this one little trick. If you could
Mm-hmm.
unveil some YAML and some hope and give it to a developer stuck in the Java world. And so we talked about that. I'd love to get your offering in that vein. And then also I'd love to talk about this Argo stuff because Flux, not Argo. We talked about Argo for a brief second. That was a different
Yeah.
conversation. Let's talk about the
Mm-hmm.
Flux
Yeah.
contribution you're
Beautiful
talking about.
project. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're asking what's one neat trick that any developer could benefit from?
Yeah, you're like if I had to do a clickbaity YouTube video and I could get like you're like YAML Moses. You're coming down from the mountain. You've got a secret to share from on high. Like what are you gonna tell people? What's the one thing that we cave dwellers should know that will drastically improve our life when dealing with production?
Pauline Narves from Gitpod, right? She does
I do not know, but I would
all
like
of developer experience at Gitpod. And she was asking on Twitter, or at least the artist formerly named as Twitter, what is your favorite CLI tool, right? And you asked me, gosh, like what is one neat trick that every developer can benefit from? And immediately I reach back into what feels like eons of pain, but in reality, just like a short number of years of actual engineering time, right? And a lot of the pain came from the problems and the complexity of the systems that I got to work on, right? And but then the joy came from solving problems elegantly or maybe in a fun, hacky way with all of these people that I really respected. And the channel of the joy was often a funky bash one-liner or a really well-written bash script or a well-configured ZSH shell that gave me proper coloring output and white space inside of, in between the forsaken outputs of my commands, but just I like a little bit of like a new line in between everything that I ever did, right? Or like the ability to see my Git branch and then the status of whether or not it was dirty or if I needed to push it or if I had changes that I needed to pull down, like there was an arrow up or an arrow down. And I think that for every developer, that the command line is an essential superpower, and maybe we can get to a world, right, where people don't need to be spending time in the terminal. Maybe we can make better platforms, maybe with things like Backstage, like so much more information is going to be presented to people in a well-designed graphical interface that gives them context about the performance of their application and what version they're running and the status of the fleet and how changes have rolled out. And maybe that's a future that we can imagine, right? But the future that I live in and the past that I have solved problems and pain through is certainly a world of text-based programs that are crafted in editors that are managed by a text-based version control system and that use tooling where the lowest common denominator is the terminal emulator. And I think that if you can spend a little bit of time to make keyboard shortcuts work for skipping words and going to the beginning and the end of line as you're authoring commands, and if you can spend a little bit of time learning about how to pipe and filter and manipulate text with grep and set, and if you spend a little bit of time like adding color to your scripts, learning ANSI color codes, like these technologies are ancient, but they're unfortunately more relevant today to the developer experience than ever before. And that's what I immediately feel for. Is
that's a great freaking
really
answer.
Good with the command line. Like it's there all the time. Like, I can feel, the fun thing about the command line tool is it's like playing with toys, because the Unix philosophy gives you all of just these like single purpose tools that you get to combine together. And one of my favorite toys is this tool called BAT. Right. And so like the exciting thing about programming in tools, right, is like there's always kind of something new coming along that sort of does everything that we're used to. Is literally a tool solving the exact same problem that we've already had tools that solve it for, but then it does it just a little bit better, right? And so we all know Cat, right? CAT, cat,
Yes.
right? You want to cat out a file. You want
Text
to,
file. Well, you could
like
bind it
move
if it's useless there.
some streams, and like move them around, right?
Yeah.
And that does the same thing. But instead of
But
being written in C, it's written in Rust. And it
it's
handles a bunch of different character streams. And it can detect the language of the file extension that you're working with and then output something that's syntax highlighted. Or it's got a bunch of really friendly command line flags that will add line numbers, to your output so that you know that you're on the 97th line of this CSV file that you just grepped through and then did some sed and aux to. And then you could, cat out some YAML files, but instead of catting it out, you bat it out and then you pass it through -l YAML. And then now all of your YAML is not this incomprehensible block of text. It's nicely syntax highlighted. And so, your ungodly kind of, kubectl one-liner that lets you find, a deployment in this namespace that has this particular label selector because you're trying, you're feeling pain, right? Like the system is complicated, and you're trying to figure out like what version of this particular microservice you deploy to production, and you're looking to get the container name so that you can then go and do another command, right? And the last thing that you want in this moment is for your tools to feel like they suck. And it's such a beautiful thing when you've set up your bash PS1 or your ZS, maybe you've upgraded to ZSH or something more modern, right? That it's giving you the right information. It's telling you the cluster that you're in. It's nicely separated from the output of your other commands. Me personally, I love color in my terminal as long as it's the appropriate amount and it's actually meaningful, semantic. Mm-hmm. And then you like catted out the deployment information. Now it's also syntax highlighted and you can filter it down maybe with some YTT or YQ stuff, and you're like, oh, I just have this one little thing. That was the one thing I was looking for. And I'm not sifting through my buffer and like suffering in these seas of characters, right? To add some semantic meaning to the terminal. I love that. That is a great
that's a great inspired answer. Are you Oh My Z Shell rocker?
I don't use Oh My Z Shell. I use Presto. Prezto. Yeah. Which is a really no brains kind of setup. You clone the repo, you run a thing, and you put it in your ZSHRC, and it runs great. I love Presto.
In the programming Java world and in Ruby and Python and others, I suppose, there's a something env solution, right? So SDKman in Java, RBNV, pipenv, pip, and then pipenv in the Python world, etc. Is there something that you in the Kubernetes and that ecosystem? Is there like a tool you use to manage many contemporaneous versions of tools? Like in the Java world, it's very common. I need to have Java 17 and 21.
Yeah. So if I need to roll back to like an older version of the Helm command line tool or customize
just for this project,
like very version sensitive. Yeah. Outside of maybe having more of a Docker container based strategy for development, then I think for infrastructure-y people who are constantly gluing things together that are very disparate from each other and not designed to necessarily work together, like you're always reaching for like the lowest common denominator stuff. I end up writing a lot of make files and using a lot of env-rc, which is
let's go.
Dir-env. Yeah, Dir-env is really fantastic.
Perfect answer.
Right. And it allows you to switch contexts. Now, as far as actually switching the versions of like command line tools and things like that, I would probably, if I could, I would reach for a Docker container, or if I didn't want to invite the pain of containers into my life. One thing that is kind of useful is if you use Vendor from the Carvel project, which is an open source set of Unix C cloud native tools, which I highly recommend. If you are a cloud native practitioner and you feel pain, just go to carvel.dev right now, like carvel.dev. There are 5 command line tools and 2 Kubernetes controllers that solve just painful bits of the cloud native mess, right? It's not a whole platform. It's not like a full solution that's telling you how to do your entire job. It's just like hey, do you feel pain? Well, we have a Unixy tool that solves that one problem. And if your problem is, gosh, I really wish that I could get a versioned single, statically linked Go binary. Well, you could pull that from the GitHub release of the project that distributes that binary for your architecture. And you could use a tool called Vendor. You write one YAML file and say vendor sync, and now it pulls it into your project's root,
Oh, but is that only for Go, or is it like for...
No, I mean, it would work for anything that would be like a statically linked binary. So like a Rust binary would come out too. But in the cloud native tool space, right? Like the Helm command line tool, Customize, kubectl, like all of those things that you would probably really commonly use to interface with the cluster or a container registry or something like that. All of the Carvel tools themselves, they're usually written in like Go or Rust or something, and you can just download a binary. And so Vendor is actually appropriate to go and grab that file just as much as it would be appropriate to grab a YAML file or an internal folder of a Go software project or something, which is usually something that would be criminal for you to use that code. But you have a reason for your crimes, right? So Vendor is not going to get in your way. You can just go and use it and do all of the evil things that you want, right?
This is so cool. I really gotta. So this is one of those things that the VMware / Tanzu / organization, now Broadcom, we're contributors to this stuff, aren't we? Or am I?
Yeah, the Tanzu team is heavily invested in the Carvel project, and a lot of our products actually leverage Carvel extensively.
Cool. But this is open source. You can just use it.
Like a open source kind of almost like when you think of like the GNU tools, right? Like the GNU tools have like cat, grep, sed, awk, etc. Right? Yeah, Carvel is like the Carvel tools. It's the cloud native equivalent of that. And
wow,
they're very Unixy tools, that just solve only their domain of problem. They're not trying to combine everything into a whole workflow. If you happen to use a lot of the Carvel tools together, you'll see the workflow emerges. But like everybody has problems like pinning container image tags to digests. Nobody likes to do that because it doesn't feel like a human thing to do. Well, wow, I'm blanking for a second. It's not image package that I was thinking of. There's a Carvel tool it's
K-build.
Wow. No.
KBLD.
Sorry, 1 second. No, let me just look at the list of
image package.
It is K-build that I was thinking of. You're right. Yeah. Okay. K-build is really good at resolving image tags, right? And it doesn't matter what you do. Like, you don't have to be using Kubernetes. You could be using Docker Swarm. You could be using GitHub Actions, which is very container native. You could be in Circle CI. You could be deploying container images to some sort of Lambda function based thing, right? The fact is, like, you are working with container image tags if you are a DevOpsy infrastructure build engineering kind of person, right? And chances are the easiest and most human readable thing for you to do is to use the image tags. But image tags are mutable. It's a lie, right? It's like a tomorrow that might actually reference a completely different artifact, right? And so you should probably resolve the image tag. Yes, exactly. Right? Yeah. Like, everyone sensibly is like, no, I'm not going to use the latest tag, like, unless you're doing some quick hack. But most people would see a semver tag like version 3.1, right? And they would use it. But 3.1 could be 3.1.3 tomorrow and then 3.1.4 the next day, which maybe you want that behavior, or maybe you don't want artifacts to be floating around and you actually want to pin it, right? So you would have to go and look up the image digest, the actual content addressable digest that can only ever exist for this image, right? And like, use that in your deployment pipeline, in your Circle CI especially we're talking about building software, like
Yeah.
pin the thing that builds your software, so it doesn't float on and then now you have a supply chain vulnerability, right?
Right.
And so this is a universal problem. You probably just need one really sharp tool in your tool set that just resolves image tags and leaves you a comment or an annotation that tells you, hey, I resolved this tag at this time, and
Wait,
now
so
you've got
is
this
the input
unreadable paths.
a Docker image tag and then you just get a digest out, or like how do you use it?
You would give kbuild a YAML file that has the
Oh,
manifest that has the container image being used in it. And if you're using something more esoteric, you can tell kbuild how to get to that image. It has some heuristic things, like if it sees an image field, it's going to assume that that's probably something of the proper format. It's going to try to parse it. And then by default, it'll actually try to annotate it. If it sees that it has an object meta in there, it'll be like, yeah, let me give you a Kubernetes style annotation that tells you, like, I resolved this tag at this time, and it became this,
and so now it's imprinted in the file that you were analyzing. That's
exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, because that's a huge mess, right? Is like you get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm gonna pin all of my tags, and now operationally nothing is gonna float around. But then a human gets in there, and they're looking at this deployment YAML file, and they're like, what is this SHA-256 thing that's like a bunch of characters long? Like, what version of the software is that? And now they're like reading the logs, like hoping that the software printed the version of what it's supposed to be, and it just feels like we're in 1990 again, right? We're reading web server logs to figure out what the software is doing instead of like actually declaring what our intent was. And so the problem is that like container image tags are not human readable. And so it would be really great if, we left some breadcrumbs in there, right? We've got to feed the machine what it needs to do the immutable behavior. But then we have to also annotate or comment or do something inside of the deployment configuration so that people can then know what the computer was dealing with. So,
wait, so the annotation that gets left behind is the image name, and then the digest is what's specified.
Yeah, the tag and when it resolved. Yeah, right. So you're like, hey, like at this time when we made this configuration, this was version 3.1, and it resolved to this container image, right?
So
and then now you can actually go and you can, but you can see that image SHA like maps to the tag.
So the image attribute that's left in the manifest after you're done is the SHA, and there's an annotation specifying the human readable thing. Okay, that's so good.
Yeah,
that's so good.
Yeah,
I have that problem.
And then now it's just like it's part of the way that you use your tools. Just leaves you the breadcrumbs that serve you as a person. And
I mean, half of the reason I use Kustomize is to plug in a version. Like that goes away now. I don't need it. Kustomize is like a way of life.
At the end of the day,
surgical text editing.
We're layering all of our tools together, right? So like that's a great point that you made there. Is you're like, well, I use Kustomize to solve a lot of these configuration problems, right?
No, just that one version changing. Oh, it's so annoying. Yeah. Like Kustomize creates more pain than it solves, but it gives me a way to like, I could just do sed, like you mentioned earlier, sed and awk. Like I could just find the thing and replace it in manifest. It's like just.
Yeah, the fun thing about that is it's like it's like the easier and simpler thing is the thing that you've been doing for so long, but then it also invites you into like a class of kind of danger, right? It's like sed and awk, and they're not structure aware, right? Like something like YQ would be a little bit safer.
And then, this is more Carvel stuff.
YTT is the Carvel answer. YQ, I don't actually. There's several renditions of the YQ project you can go find, and I think most infrastructure people have touched YQ at some point. But I think a lot of people don't know about YTT, which is another way to structurally edit. Yeah, it's like the sed and awk and grep, and also like a full programming language that you need, except it's YAML specific. Right. So YTT does something really smart. I think a lot of people in the configuration space, they're like, I need some sort of template. And so people have worked with Ruby templates. They've worked with Jinja. And Ruby templates and Jinja feel really similar to Go templates. Right. They're all this you give it a text-based program. It sort of looks like you're probably in the configuration space, which means you're working with JSON or YAML or maybe some JavaScript files or something structured. And so
Right.
you've got this templating language with bits of structured bits in there. And then it's probably a functional programming language that can then output, hopefully something structured, but really the template language can produce any text file, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of text files that are not valid structures, right? But it's really flexible because you can make INI files, you can make JSON, you can make YAML and whatever, right? So then you have a bunch of these hermetic languages like JSONet and SkyConfig, and what are some other? There's a JSONet project that does like a like Tonka, I think is what it's called, which used to be called Ksonet. It's a Kubernetes specific version of JSONet, right?
Yeah.
It's called Tonka. And Customize is sort of in this space, but then it doesn't try to be a full programming language, but it solves a similar problem space, which is like hey, we only want to output structured things, right?
Right.
Like Customize cannot produce an INI file. It only produces specifically Kubernetes YAML files, right? Like Customize only knows how to work on Kubernetes objects. Something like JSONet, you could output any JSON, right? And so it's not Kubernetes specific, but then we can like find projects and libraries and kind of decorate JSONet into a configuration specific language, right? So YTT is a YAML specific language, which if you have YAML problems, and I know I have YAML problems,
99 of them,
then YTT is its aim is to try to be an approachable, like learnable, flexible YAML programming language. And the way that it does that is it embeds a language that feels like Python into comments of YAML.
That sounds horrific.
And the result,
just scaring me.
Yeah, it sounds horrific. But now imagine.
Actually, it doesn't look so bad. It looks okay.
Are an infrastructure person or a sysadmin. Or like some sort of build engineer, a dev team lead, and you have discovered that the infrastructure thing that you didn't make, that you've been depending on for 2 years, is broken, right? Or you need to change it, or you have to make another service, right? Somehow this wasn't your problem anymore. You didn't even know that it existed, maybe, and like you've just been depending on it. And there is this magical YAML file in your repository with a tool chain that you've never heard of, and it's talking to a service that you just learned about today. And you read this YAML file, right? And immediately we are not in a fun place, right?
No, never.
Because there could be all kinds of complexity here that we have no idea what we're about to unearth. We're using an internal platform, we're like on custom infrastructure, all kinds of stuff. And this YAML file has a comment that says that for everything in this collection, we're going to make a little bit of a loop. And then there's one YAML node in a list.
Right.
And if that's the first time that you've ever seen that, it looks a little bit like Python, but it also just looks like a small YAML file. And you're like, something processes this and then actually turns this one item into a list of 10 items.
Is that this bit?
And it says that it's reading from this values file, and there's this value. Yeah, exactly. You've pulled up YTT's interactive playground here.
Yeah, and it looks really good.
Fun.
So
here's
a for.
Yeah, so there's this like for loop right here, right? Yeah. So like just this first item right here, lines 5 to 8, right? So we define an array, and then we comment the list item that says, for every j in the range 0 through 4, there's going to be an item that has the j in it, right? So it's item, and then we enter comment, and then @, and then j. Like now we're going to be looping, and you can imagine then in your head, even before you cheat and look at the right side, that this is going to be an array with 4 list nodes, each with a map inside of it that says item. And then there's going to be the j, which is going to go from 0 through 3, right? Because that's the range 0 to 4, and that's how Pythonic ranges work. And underneath, this is not actually Python. It's a hermetic language called Starlark. And it all runs inside of a single Go binary, which means you don't have to have a crazy tool chain or anything on your computer.
That's very
you just
convenient.
download one binary and you can use this tool. And so you can see, like on the right, it outputs, that you get a list. And if you were a person in that space, right, and you've just inherited this problem and you were expecting to see a 50-line YAML file, but now you see a 10-line YAML file and it has a loop in it, and you're like, ooh, okay. Yeah. I think I could figure this out. And then 2 maps down, it's like getting values from somewhere else. And this is something that YAML doesn't do, right? It's part of where a lot of YAML problems come from, is the configuration. It's meant to be very static, and so it just proliferates. Every system wants to know what your domain is. Everything. Right. Like, this is the most common infrastructure engineering, like build engineering pain, is like, I want to set my domain, and my app needs to know about it, and my cluster needs to know about it, and my edge, kind of a DDoS protection provider needs to know about it. And so I got to configure this one domain name in 20 places, right? Gosh, it would be really nice if I could define a values file and output my 20 YAML files and reference that domain so that I can just change it in one place, right?
I mean, and this is especially valuable for like your typical, even within the same, because I'll put a bunch, if I have a small app, I'll just put a bunch of resources in the same file. And you've got the same logical thing, like the name, for example, of the resource. It's just foo dash certificate, foo dash service, foo dash, ingress. And it's over and over and over, just constantly referencing the same thing over and over.
Now, YTT has kind of one more treat up its shoulder, right? And so we can see like, okay, it feels like a programming language. It has conditionals, it's got flow control, it has loops. You can start to compose things. It's got, all the normal programming language things, libraries, modules, ways to source data, ways to do type validation and checking. Like, it's a strongly typed language in a world of YAML where types are constantly floating around on you, right? So, I mean, that image tag is never going to magically convert from like a string to a number because you ended up with a commit hash that was only numbers, right? Like that's something that'll happen to you in YAML. That's never going to happen to you in a YTT program where you're expecting.
Oh, that's so cool.
Value. But
this is great.
One more thing.
Okay.
That feel good thing about things like customize, and if I actually reach further back, customize idea of patching is not new, right? I used to be a very avid puppeteer. So I worked with Puppet control repos, right, for lots of VMs in a data center. And Puppet,
I pull the strings around here. That's one of my favorite t-shirts. What?
Hyra is this like deep merging algorithm that like takes C's of YAML and like based off of the topology of your data center, it'll figure out what the value or the configuration values are for this machine versus this machine, right?
Yeah.
And so it does all of this merging based off of a bunch of conditional things. Customize is kind of like Hyra, where you're like, hey, when I go to this environment, I want to apply these patches. And when I'm on a developer laptop, I'm going to apply these patches, right? Or now I've got 20 clusters, and 5 of those clusters have special patches or something, right? You find like this is probably how you use customize, right? Because you're just changing versions. And
I don't really have giant different sets of config. I just have one with a few extra values here and there.
Yeah, and then you just patch it.
Yeah.
So YTT is really good at giving you tools to patch things however you want. Like, I would like to select some documents in the whole sea of documents that I'm working on in my YTT program. And based off of whatever criteria I want, I can write a function, I can match some field names, I can match an object by a subset. Then once I find all of those objects, I would like to apply these keys and demerge them in, or I want to find these keys and remove them, or I want to update some stuff. And so it doesn't happen magically like in Customize. But it gives you the ability to provide your intention and like actually slice and dice things in really non-trivial ways. And that lets you build powerful platforms. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about tools like YTT. Single binary that you can just add.
I dig it. I've got myself some time ahead of me. It's the holidays. I'm gonna finally take the plunge and learn some Carvel. That's part one. You just mentioned powerful platforms. Uh, um, a couple of thoughts, and I'm trying to be mindful of your time here because we've long since exceeded whatever time I stipulated. But backstage, yes or no? Like, what's your developer portals? What's that future look like? You mentioned that earlier. Hopefully, it'll be the place we all converge or whatever. But what's what's
I
the
think
state
the
of like
thing
in your
that
community?
excites me about a pessimistic platform builder when I see things like Backstage is I see tools that are primarily trying to solve a social problem uh, being built in a communal way.
Right.
So, like before in 2005 and in 2011, if you could get into the same room as like the DevOps people at Netflix, and you could listen to them talk about the way that they do a rolling upgrade, this was
Right.
like such valuable information because you could only hear them talk about it. Like it
Yeah.
was one of the places in the industry where somebody was disrupting an entire ecosystem and frankly economically like changing the whole landscape. And
Right.
they're saying, hey, culturally, we do engineering differently. We behave differently. We ship smaller things more frequently and we test them in this really novel way because we have some sophistication in the way that we do our software deployments. Well, you can imagine, right? That's what leads to something like Spinnaker, right? Which is like the adoption of a tool that codifies this way of working. But
Right.
you have to somehow get not just the tool with the way of working, but also all of the people that use that tool and all the people who are the stakeholders of the change in production and the people who make the software and the people who decide what the business goals are and say that it's okay to spend money on, working this way. You have to get everybody to agree that we're habitually going to do things in a way that this tool can allow us to work together. And habits
Right.
are like the hardest thing to change.
Right.
So I look at Backstage, right? And I look at like being able to take plugins
Yeah.
and expose a graphical experience to technical people and non-technical people working together to ship value with software that changes the way our world works. And the only reason I can get excited about that is it's not the tool that we're advocating for, but we are codifying ways for people to change their habits, and that's pretty next level,
That is a perfect answer. That's awesome. I'm actually sad we're not ending right now because this would be like a great place to stop. That would be the cherry on the milkshake. But okay, I've still got one more. Ah, that's a great answer because you're right. That it is. I was talking to Whitney about it, and I said, to my mind, Backstage gives you a way to expose the as a service ification
Mhm.
of your organization's habits or rituals. So your DBA stands up a database like this. Well, as a service,
Yeah,
put it in
so many
Backstage, and
things
now
are very
yeah,
ritual is a
yeah.
great word for that, right? So
Um,
it's like you must dance in a certain way so that the rain will come, right? Please fill out this spreadsheet and send it to the
yeah.
security team. I
Oh,
think
my ITIL ticket. Oh,
Backstage, right? Like it feels like you could paint a future where
yeah.
maybe you can click a button in that actually does the automated action, and then you still have to send the spreadsheet in an email, to
Right.
satisfy somebody's
Oh,
ticket quota. But at least you know that it got done correctly because a machine did
you hope.
it.
Yeah. Well, at least there's a convention. Hopefully, guardrails. Okay. Part two.
I
The
love
other
the
thing.
I love the revulsion of pain that I got from you when I said to email a spreadsheet. Right? Like it's
I've
almost
been
like
there.
you've done something like that before.
I
You've been
did. I
there.
committed war
Yes.
crimes. I was at a bank that shall remain nameless where they were using
Mm-hmm.
ClearCase and ClearQuest, and they
Mm.
had SharePoint. And so somebody had the brilliant idea because ClearCase and ClearQuest was so utterly terrible that instead of managing and tracking issues and work there, they would have a SharePoint Excel spreadsheet, which people
Uh-huh.
used instead that then somebody every week had to manually copy over to ClearCase and ClearQuest just to satisfy that was the process and it was being used. It was just cringe. Okay, next thing. I think of guardrails as being super good for I want to scale out the organization, and the only way to do that is with consistency, right? And to that end, we talk a lot about GitOps, obviously, and you and I have had this conversation before. We're not going to retread that wonderful conversation. There's an existing discussion you can all listen to with Leigh here on this very show, not this channel. I think it was on the podcast.
Yeah, the beautiful podcast.
Yeah, and this will go on the podcast as well, but we're starting on the YouTube channel, double dipping into the content bucket, so to speak. Okay, so you did mention there's a new feature on which you'd like to work, and briefly, what is, and again, being mindful of your time and your commitments here, what is GitOps, and what is this new feature on which you'd like to work?
Yeah, so what is GitOps? GitOps is a way for people to communally participate with each other, to communally talk about change and version it and agree about it and be confident about it before shipping that change into a distributed system. I think that like GitOps, to me, you'll find a lot of other definitions of it. And if you actually go to the open GitOps project website, you'll actually see 4 pieces of the technical definition of what a GitOps tool set should do for you, right? Like it's pull-based workflows, active reconciliation, all these good things, right? But the social effect of doing GitOps is that we are working on hard problems in a distributed computing landscape, and that we need a communal way to know what the actual intention of what our software, of what our production environment should look like, right? And doing things in the GitOps way makes sure that we are not just imperatively iterating on the computer in a way without considering other people's needs, right? And so we take our place of collaboration, our collaboration tools, our platforms, whether they be like things like GitLab or Bitbucket or GitHub, and we glue that to the front of the configuration system of our distributed computer. That is what GitOps is. Now, I helped work a lot on Flux too, which Flux is a toolkit of controllers and components that give you a great GitOps experience if you, as a team, can adopt the proper habits. And one of the things that I want to look at adding to Flux, and talking with the community and the maintainers about, and then potentially doing a bunch of engineering work to make happen, is to make Flux a little bit smarter about what's happening in your image registry or your OCI repository that holds your container artifacts and has them tagged at different versions with all the digests and all that. Yeah. Flux already has ways to get state about what's happening in the image registry. The hard part right now is in a very big environment where you have lots of clusters, oftentimes when you push an artifact, there is replication lag to your local repository. And because configuration changes, like say the Kubernetes manifests that run your deployments are so much smaller than container images. Like if you're working with multi-gigabyte container images, you could imagine that any sort of number of failures or even just completely normal network behavior might make that container image show up 10 minutes, 2 hours, 4 days late to the place where it needs to be consumed, right? Yeah. But the configuration that actually wants to use that thing could be valid and ship to the cluster that needs it very quickly, right? Seconds.
So it's not going to find it when it tries to pull it down on the other side.
Giving Flux some smarts to actually have a checklist of things to consider before it actually rolls out a configuration change at all. A sort of pre-flight checklist or feature gate is a really powerful idea. And it's actually an idea for which there's already an RFC. But it's like a health check, but instead of a health check, which happens kind of afterwards, the fact, it's actually a pre-flight check, right? It's a change.
That's actually
right. So An example of it, and I was actually this came from working with a customer who has a bunch of edge stuff. I was speaking with the architect and saying, hey, how do we deal with this replication lag thing? Because they only want to replicate, during off hours, right? Like they don't want to change the store during the daytime anyway, right? But like, after 6:30 or after 9:45 p.m., the gates open and the OCI repository can start pulling things down. But of course, like we want the GitOps reconciliation to be happening all the time. And, the people who publish artifacts could be different from the people who are actually making the changes, and, big organization, big global customer kind of stuff. And I'm like, gosh, that's, and I recommended some workflows outside of Flux to deal with this problem. This is actually a common thing that people working with Flux at scale run into. And people want gates for all sorts of reasons, right? They want to tie it to Jira tickets. They want to, they want somebody to put a check mark on a change approval, before something rolls out. So we could use these change gates for all kinds of stuff. But I came to this generic API idea because of replication lag. And we already have other controllers, and so basically it's change gates. I was speaking with the Flux team at KubeCon, and we were kind of drawing it up, and this would be kind of a version 2 RFC, of something that's already been proposed with a very different API shape. So
that's so good. That's so good.
Yeah.
That would be like, I like the idea that you have a chance to like, don't just make it like a fixed set of rules. Make it so I can plug in my own custom checks,
exactly.
Like an
so
check.
The way the API change that I kind of have in my head is we just need to do 2 things. One is we take the health checks API, which you can already plug any object into.
Right.
And then we have an auto health check feature that like kind of determines maybe if you wanted a full list of every object and you wanted to case status check it, then you can turn on this flag on Flux, and it'll just go and do that for this particular reconciliation. We're going to take that API and just put it at the top, right? And then we'll provide an auto feature that says, hey, like, actually get all of the container images that you are trying to release. And if they changed from the previous manifest, then make sure that they're already in the registry before you roll this out, right? And so, there's a Boolean that you can turn it on, but there's also the generic API where you can put, Jira ticket reflector, and like it's going to go and check the status of that thing, right? And then if you want like change approval reflector, or like a, change approval CRD or something, like you can write your own controller. You can use some other thing. You can make the status of a Jenkins job or a Tecton, or a pipe CD job, with some CRD status, like block your Flux release, like anything that you want. You just pipe it to the status object of a, something that's case status compliant, and that could be your change gates. So it would work for everything.
Okay. This makes me happy. Okay, so that's a January thing, right?
I'm
sure.
looking at starting to write the request for change to then talk with people.
Okay.
I can promise that in January.
Well, I mean, you know what? So it's not Kubernetes. Like going back to, because it moves slowly like an operating system. And earlier on, we were talking about how it's not just Kubernetes; it's Kubernetes with Carvel, just like GNU and Linux. It's not Linux; it's GNU tools plus Linux. It's actually Carvel plus Kubernetes, right? And in the same way that operating systems like Linux move rather slowly, so too does the Kubernetes. But that's okay because it gives us so much benefit when it works.
And you haven't shipped the Argo project. Gatekeeper. And I mean, all of these essential components. What's considered core, all the things that people need. Yeah.
And also, I just learned about one CAP.
CAP is a fun command line tool. And its reconciliation logic is also a big part of CAP controller, which then takes a tool that reduces pain in your command line tool and actually also adds the value of that to a controller. And does it in a GitOps way.
And that's kind of like a GitOps world thing, not as powerful as Argo and Flux, I guess.
I would agree that CAP controller, it's actually coming into its own a little bit. Right. And so like as a pessimistic person and as somebody who's also biased and has worked on all of the engineering in Flux, which is amazing engineering. We just did a release of Helm controller in Flux that is essentially a re-envisioning of the entire Helm project. Any Helm user should use it. That's my soapbox. the Carvel's cap controller is now starting to be more production proven, right? And the Carvel team will be very happy to hear me say this, right? And it's got its own niche and its own really flexible set of it's really just one and a half APIs that let you do some really powerful things using the individual Carvel tools, and then also things like Q and Helm, right? Like mixing in, other parts of the ecosystem to give the user the packaging power that they need. And that word packaging is the main niche that I think Cap Controller has over something like Flux or Argo. Packages are this idea that's very well formed in the Carvel project, and it's a missing part of the equation in a lot of the space.
We can all learn from each other. I learned from you, my friend. It's about that time. It's time for you to go back to the beach. You look. Almost people sunset. Don't realize this. You actually joined me on vacation. You're actually in paradise. I mean Hawaii, right? For those of you just joining. Dude, Dan, come to San Francisco, but also go to Hawaii. Lee's in a better place at the moment, right? He's where the turtles are. Which is
I'm calling awesome. Him from Honolulu over here on the 37th floor of a tower by Alamana Beach Park.
See that's the world's smallest violin. Smallest one. Just so sad for you. Okay. So anyway, if you're on the internet, because
we have the window open over here, and it's a nice place right here, right?
Such a beautiful, and there's a beach like a minute away from you, just turtles. So if you're on the internet, if you're on the internet and you want to be found, I know you're not there right now because you're at the beach, but if you are on the internet and you want to be found, where do people find you?
Yeah, I think nowadays you'll see me posting a lot on LinkedIn, which is sort of the pivot that a lot of DevRel people have. And then you do find me on Twitter / if you want to call it X. I am at a version of my last name. It's Capleighh, Capili. And just connect with me anywhere, and you'll find our team doing all kinds of fun stuff. I will also be in person at SoCal Linux Expo in mid-March.
That's a great show.
In Pasadena. Yeah, Scale is a wonderful conference. Highly recommend that if you are in the LA area or thinking of traveling back there to see family or something, go to Scale.
Just travel to it.
Scale is a wonderful thing. We've got a Kubernetes Community Day and a DevOps Days there. Doing a lot of stuff for DevOps Days Denver right now. We're going to be putting on a great show end of April. So love the DevOps Days events.
You live you're in Colorado roughly, right?
Yeah, I live in Denver. Yeah,
people
South Denver.
So for people who are wondering about that violin, he's going to leave the beach and then go to the slopes.
Yes. Yeah, I surfed last Sunday, and I think I'll be snowboarding next Monday. So
I hate you. I hate you so much. Hey, buddy, thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us. And bye.
You put on a great show, Josh. Thank you, friends, for all of the folks who came in. And let's all get better at doing cloud native together.